Entrepreneurs, founders, operators, owners, independent business owner. I'm not sure. I know you know that those terms have slightly different connotations in different contexts. We'll talk about why and how to use them correctly in today's Builders Live. Hey, I'm Chris. I'm the co-founder of organization. Entrepreneurs. That's the word we've always said. I guess I call myself an entrepreneur, but I also am say founder. I've been called a small business owner too. These terms all have different meanings and connotations, and I'm going to talk a bit about that with Maria Meyers. She's the executive director of the University of Missouri Kansas City's Innovation Center. For a class of ecosystem builders, though, she's also known as the founder of SourceLink, a category creating software platform for economic development organizations. Maria Meyers, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. I can't wait to talk about entrepreneurship. I love it.
I do know that about you. You like to talk about that. All right. So you've been in the supporting of entrepreneurs game for quite some time. We're going to get a little bit to the backstory. But start me off with confirming my biased opinion. I feel like these words all have slightly different connotations and they mean something different in different places. You know, the old joke that some cultures have a lot more words for snow than others. Americans have a lot of words for entrepreneurs. Confirm for me, Maria. Do you use these terms in slightly different connotations in different places? Talk to me a bit about your own journey in these terms and we can talk through some of them.
Sure. Yeah, I think things have changed over time as to what we call entrepreneurs. When we first started SourceLink back in the early 2000s, I think there was a big difference between being an entrepreneur and being an independent business owner, so much so that we had to use both terms all the time. And, an independent business owner was somebody that was going to be small and stay small. And the entrepreneur was somebody that, oh man, they were going to get something started and they're going to sell it right away and get on to the next thing. And I think both sets of values were a little bit different. And so they had different names for each other.
I was showing this to you earlier, Maria. Let me pull this up. I was looking at Google Ngram, which tracks the use of terms, of course, in books published over time. And you can do it with Google Trends too. But this is a device that I sometimes do in lots of different contexts. Like I like to play with different word usages. And so I was looking at how the terms, I was looking at a few different options, but how the term entrepreneur, which is our blue line, founder, the red line, green line is operator, and orange line is owner, how they've been used over time. Right now, I put it between 1950 to today. 2022 is the most recent Google Ngram data. And of course, owner and operator, those terms are going to catch other use cases, but I think they at least illustrate something where we had this 20th century, and if you actually go even farther back, which I was playing with, you kind of can see how we had this class understanding rising in the Industrial Revolution of owners really became like a capital class, became the height of terminology. And you watched operator come in as a word. Again, this actually will get picked up by some other uses of the term, but for our purposes, operator grows in the 20th century. And slowly and steady, founder hangs around. It actually dips, but then founder use starts coming back up in the late 20th century, early 21st century. And entrepreneur is a relatively late comer. We know that it comes in back from French origin. But it really it's the 20th century, late 20th century that entrepreneur gets used, and it really spikes again post-dot-com bubble if you zoom in even closer to that. So I guess tell me a little bit, maybe walk me through what you might see here. Let me remove operator and owner for a second. Maybe I'll actually use small business owner and see what we see here. And tell me what do you see here in these charts, and how does it compare to your own use over a few decades of engaging with this group of people?
Well, I think entrepreneur has become sort of a badge of courage. And so we're seeing a lot more people adopting that and being really open to using it. And so maybe in the early 2000s, we were hearing the word entrepreneur associated with tech companies. And now people who are running bakeries are even working locally in a lawn mowing business, they call themselves entrepreneurs. And then another term that's really come recently is side hustler. I have a side hustle. So we hear side hustle a lot now as well, something that people are doing on the side and not full time. And we hear that term now quite a bit as well.
Mm-hmm. I'm looking at that too in the data. So do you think I'm being, is this just semantics? Like, is me chasing these word usage just seems silly to you? Or have you, over your career, felt the terms do something? Does it matter for economic development leaders and ecosystem builders to know what the terms mean and imply? Is it good for the entrepreneur themselves to have a sense of what connotation these words are conveying at any given time? Talk to me a bit about how trivial or important it is to get the terms right.
Well, I think everybody, when you say the word entrepreneur, for instance, you look around the room and a different word cloud pops up, different image cloud pops up on top of everybody's head because everybody thinks about it differently. And so one of the things that we did was begin to talk about different kinds of entrepreneurs. A lot of the reason for that was every entrepreneur uses different resources, and we found that resources clustered around the type of entrepreneur that you had. And so we actually talk about it in sort of 4 different types of entrepreneurs. We talk about Main Street entrepreneurs, and those entrepreneurs are the ones that have restaurant, retail. They're actually making our communities vibrant. I mean, drive home tonight and take a look at how many independent business owners are lining your streets, and they're the ones that are serving the soccer team with sponsorship and things like that. So they're very active usually in the communities. Then we have our micro enterprises. They start small, they can stay small. A lot of times they're people who are just starting something to build some additional personal income in their home, but it could also be somebody who left a large corporation, is doing a pretty decent consulting business just with a few people out of their basement office. So we see that as well. And then our innovation led is a group that everybody talks about a lot. It's only about 1% of the people that are in business today, but they are related to a particular new innovation or technology, and they're using that to really grow the company rapidly. And then we have our second stagers, who are people in whatever industry doing whatever, who have just figured out the processes, and they're just raring to build this thing out beyond where they are. And so those are our second stagers. And I think resources cluster around them. And so I think every individual who is an entrepreneur or side hustler thinks of themselves a little bit differently. And I think it does help for people to consider the different kinds of entrepreneurs, especially if you're an economic developer or an ecosystem builder, because you can help them get the right resources depending on what type of entrepreneur they are.
You in one of our early chats, you informed somewhat by BLS data, but also as like maybe a helpful rule of thumb. You used some of those percentages that you just kind of alluded to, call it 1% for the innovation led, you called out, call it 3%, the second stage companies, you call them, those that are in growth stage, maybe less than a quarter, 22%, or the main streeters. So that leaves you, 70 to 80% or the micro enterprise. And in the data, we know that's true. There's a whole bunch of most corporations, if you want to include corporations, or non-employer firms, which is a whole other kind of subject matter. But that framework feels to me very necessary for anyone in this work to get, because I've had those conversations, and something that you and I talked about, Maria. Any strategy can make sense if it has intention and some grounding. So we at Technically, our name, of course, has a little of the connotation of technology that has always been really aligned with innovation-led companies. That's true. That's always dominated the kind of entrepreneurs we've covered, have been those that were most likely to be high growth. We tend to not cover the kind of lawyers setting up a one-person consulting firm. But the thing that has changed that I think is interesting is, one, some of the savviest of those main streeters have taken to e-commerce strategies or doing kind of innovative work that blurs some lines. Those second stage growth companies might be a mid-sized manufacturing firm that's looking at advanced manufacturing or investments. Like some of those lines we've seen have blurred. We have seen some of those individual consultants who are suddenly doing interesting stuff with, let's call it AI and deployment. So some of those categories have like informed our coverage in ways we hadn't expected, but the terminology always felt really important. I two things that I want to throw at you, Maria, and then have you react to. Let me first start. I remember, friend of the show, someone I know you know well, Lomax Campbell. I did a piece with him a few years back, and he used a similar framework where he was really intentional about saying it matters to know what company stage you're talking about because they need different things and it's different terminology, but real similar, Maria. Like if you want to be an economic developer and just want to get people to help open an incorporation and you don't care if it's a one-person micro enterprise or a retail corridor company, that's different than if you want to be a science-forward, innovation-led accelerator that wants to boost people's chances at raising venture capital. So it does feel like terminology you got to know because it's a really big ocean of options. And what are you fishing for? Is that kind of an assessment that you'd respond to?
Yeah, I mean, I think just take the basics. Every one of these different types of business can be funded differently. So your micro might start on credit card or just some savings, for instance, versus an innovation-led who maybe needs equity funding because they don't have the collateral to trade for a bank loan, and our main streeters and second stagers may be working with banks. And so that's a very basic thing is how these get capitalized, and therefore who they need to talk to get the help they need to get started and to grow will be different depending on what kind of business you have.
I want to, before I lose you, I want to go to a couple questions about your journey yourself, Maria. But one last thing for background that you made me think about was maybe a few weeks ago, maybe a couple months ago. Had a conversation with Elizabeth Gore of Hello Alice, and I got to this headline: Americans love small business. Why don't all entrepreneurs want to run one? And this came out of a conversation with Elizabeth Gore. But like what I thought was interesting that I think we know and we both know and gets at this point of terminology, Maria, is when you look at polling data, Americans on the whole view entrepreneurship and small business as indistinguishable. They effectively are the same thing. When the average American is thinking about entrepreneurship, they think about the pizza shop owner or the hardware store owner, because as you alluded to, that's the most, it's the most in front of them. Makes total sense. But when you also look at some polling data around how a class of entrepreneurs wants to define, many of them do not want to be called a small business owner. I mentioned to you before that I have a line that I'll always remember from an interview I did where a founder said to me, if you call my business a small business, you're implying it'll never be a big business. And so they found it almost like insulting to call them a small business owner. So maybe just like leave me a little bit, Maria, about like how important it is for, you or anyone, depending on what kind of entrepreneur you're talking to. Some of them want to be, I'm the small business owner. I love that. Or please do not. You're almost insulting my business's pathways. Is that something that's in the back of your mind when you're addressing a group of entrepreneurs to kind of have a handle of like, who am I really talking to?
Well, I mean, I think what we do is we provide support to entrepreneurs, and you have to understand where people are coming from, what their experiences is, where they want to go in order to figure out what resources they need. And so understanding how they identify is also very important to the work that we do. And kind of like I said, every time you say the word, another bubble shows up somewhere with a different thinking. So you got to ask the entrepreneur, how do they feel?
What's your, before I lose you, I want to touch on SourceLink and your work at the Innovation Center, but like, what's your early memory of what you thought of as entrepreneurship? How do you first get a handle on that term or that concept? And give me a little of your memory of that word.
So, I think entrepreneurship is building something new, changing something, helping it grow. So we see entrepreneurship not just in people who start businesses, but we see it in big corporations all the time as well. And so it's a way of thinking. It's a way of considering problems and obstacles that sit in front of you and finding interesting ways to get around them, and then making decisions on whether the path you're taking is the right path to get you to where you want to be. So it's entrepreneurship is really a part of your own thinking, not so much just starting businesses.
Do you identify as an entrepreneur? And if so, when did you first become so?
So when did I get crazy with small businesses, right? So I think I had a wonderful opportunity to work with a science museum here in Kansas City, and we built a new science museum, and we created Science City at Union Station, and that was a 750,000 square foot fixer-upper, and we took it from very, very few people to a big, established, wonderful environment for Kansas City to have. And I think that's when I fell in love with being able to really take a dream and make it a reality. And after that, I spent time in small businesses, and then started here to create SourceLink, Casey SourceLink, with one person and a teacher's desk, 27 student desks, no phone, no computer, and a desire to get entrepreneurs to the right resource at the right time. And here we are.
And here we are.
Yeah.
Do you have a moment in that museum story or otherwise when you first maybe introduce yourself as an entrepreneur, or like in your head you're like, oh, I am this? Is that, or was it retroactive? Did you look back and say, oh, that's what I was doing?
Yeah, no, I didn't really introduce myself as an entrepreneur until one of our marketing team said, you're kind of an entrepreneur. And that was way, after that. So, yeah.
What year do you think that is? And was it still seen as to you, almost edgy to be using that word in this kind of context?
Yeah, I think because I was part of a university, and we are part of a university, it's hard to think of yourself as an entrepreneur. So it's probably only about 10 years ago, right?
Yeah.
That you start thinking about that. But we've built a lot of good help for entrepreneurs across the whole U.S. And so I guess that makes me entrepreneurial. Yeah.
Yeah. Before I lose you, again, I know you now lead. Well, the day job is leading UMKC's Innovation Center, but maybe let me sneak in a SourceLink question, because SourceLink serves a bunch of communities in however many communities. Do you see how they use these words differently? Oh, here we use the word founder, here we use the word entrepreneur, here you were using independent business owner. Are you seeing that geographically as a differentiation or type of company? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think every community associates itself with its own community image, and they build entrepreneurs based on the assets that are sitting in that community, whether it's expertise or maybe it's a mountain or a beach or something like that, right? And so every community that we work with is different, and it's really, that's the fun part, is going in and finding out what's different. So I suppose it's a little bit like soda and pop, where different geographies use the different terms. I think communities fall into what term makes the most sense for them. And so sometimes you'll hear founder more often, sometimes you'll hear entrepreneur more often, and sometimes you'll just hear, business owners, depending on where you are.
Maria, I have more questions for you, but no time to ask them. So I'm going to let you go. Maria Meyers, Executive Director of University of Missouri Kansas City's Innovation Center, founder of SourceLink, friend of entrepreneurs everywhere. Maria, thanks for the time.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time on Builders Live.